We think we know Elvis Presley, the king, the sneer, the gold lame suit. He was the biggest star in the world, a man who had everything. Millions of dollars, adoring fans, any woman he wanted. But did he? Did he have everything? Or was the man inside the legend desperately lonely? He was surrounded by people constantly, but was he ever truly known? His life was a whirlwind of relationships, some public, some secret, some loving, some toxic. When he died on August 16th, 1977, the music stopped, but the questions didn't. He took so many secrets to his grave, secrets about the women he loved, the people he trusted, and the man he could never escape himself. What really happened behind the closed doors of Graceland? Who was the one that got away? And was his greatest love affair with someone no one could ever see? Number 18 was Anne Margaret the true love of his life? This is the big one. The question that hangs over Elvis's entire romantic history. When people talk about Elvis and love, her name always comes up. It's Anne Margaret. They met in 1963. The movie was Viva Las Vegas. The chemistry wasn't acting. It was real. It jumped off the screen. They were two sides of the same coin. He was the king of rock and roll. She was the female Elvis. They both moved with a raw electric energy. They understood each other without words. The cast and crew saw it. The director, George Sidney, said he would just keep the cameras rolling because what they had was so natural. They would sing to each other. They would ride motorcycles together off set. He called her Rusty after her character. She called him E. It felt like a perfect match. For a brief time, it probably was. Elvis was at his peak physically. He was handsome, charming, and fun. Anne Margaret was vibrant, talented, and independent. She wasn't a starstruck fan. She was his equal. The Memphis Mafia, Elvis's inner circle, loved her. They saw a different Elvis when he was with her. He was lighter, he laughed more, he seemed genuinely happy. In his book, Elvis and Me, Sonny West, one of his closest bodyguards described Anne Margaret as the best woman for Elvis. He said she understood his world but also had her own. She didn't need him. She wanted him. That was a big difference, but there was probably a big one. Her name was Priscilla Beaulieu. Back at Graceland, Priscilla was waiting. She was the young girl he had met in Germany. He had molded her, shaped her into his ideal woman. He had promised to marry her. Elvis was caught. He was in love with Anne Margaret in Hollywood, but he had a commitment to Priscilla in Memphis. Things came to a head when the press got wind of the romance. A story came out suggesting Elvis and Anne Margaret were engaged. The story, likely planted by her publicity team, made its way to Colonel Tom Parker. The Colonel was Elvis's manager, and the Colonel controlled everything. He hit the roof. He called Elvis and read him the riot act. An affair was one thing. A public scandal that could threaten the good boy image he had carefully crafted was another. According to members of the Memphis Mafia, the Colonel told Elvis to end it. Elvis was cornered. He went to Anne Margaret and told her what he had to do. He had given his word to Priscilla. He was a Southern boy. His word meant something. The breakup was devastating for both of them. Anne Margaret described it in her 1994 autobiography, Anne Margaret, My Story. She wrote, "We had been in our own private world. We had a strong connection, but it had to end. They remained friends. In fact, their bond lasted the rest of his life. Whenever she was performing in Las Vegas, he would send a guitar-shaped flower arrangement to her dressing room. She did the same for him. It was a quiet acknowledgement of what they once had." When she married the actor Roger Smith in 1967, Elvis was heartbroken, but he wished her well. He told his friend George Klein, she's married now. I'm happy for her. I hope she's happy. But the tone in his voice said something else. Priscilla knew about Anne Margaret. She knew she was the rival for Elvis's heart. In her own book, Priscilla admits to throwing a vase against a wall in a fit of jealousy. She felt the threat. She knew Anne Margaret was different from the other Hollywood starlets. This was real. The presence of Anne Margaret haunted their marriage from the beginning. When Elvis died in 1977, Anne Margaret was one of the very few celebrities who attended his funeral. She sat quietly with her husband, a silent testament to a love that never fully got its chance. She was there to say goodbye to the man she called EP. So what went to the grave? The depth of his regret. Did he spend the rest of his life wondering what if? Was his marriage to Priscilla an obligation he fulfilled while his heart was somewhere else? He was loyal to the promise he made, but loyalty and love are not the same thing. He chose the safe, controllable relationship over the passionate, unpredictable one. It might have been the biggest romantic mistake of his life, a secret pain he carried until the end. What do we still not know? Did he ever tell Anne Margaret directly that he wished he had chosen her? Was the engagement story a deliberate attempt by her to force his hand? And if Colonel Parker hadn't intervened, would Elvis have broken his promise to Priscilla and built a life with the one woman who might have been his true soulmate? Number 17. Did Colonel Parker sabotage his happiness? Colonel Tom Parker was not a colonel. His name wasn't Tom Parker. And he wasn't from West Virginia. He was Andreas von Koich, an illegal immigrant from the Netherlands. He was a carnival barker turned music manager. And he was the single most powerful person in Elvis Presley's life. Their relationship was more than business. It was a complex, symbiotic bond that lasted for over 2 decades. The Colonel made Elvis a star. The Colonel also built a cage around him. Parker's control was absolute. He controlled the music, the movies, the merchandise, and the public image. But his influence didn't stop there. It seeped into Elvis's personal life. The Colonel saw Elvis as a product, a money-making machine. Anything that threatened the machine had to be managed or eliminated. And passionate, complicated relationships were a threat. Look at the Anne Margaret situation. The Colonel's reaction wasn't that of a concerned friend. It was a business manager protecting an asset. A public engagement to a fiery co-star was messy. It was unpredictable. A quiet, controlled courtship with a young, unknown girl back home was much better for the brand. Priscilla was manageable. Anne Margaret was a star in her own right. She had her own career, her own team. She couldn't be controlled by the Colonel, and the Colonel needed control. Alana Nash's definitive 2003 biography, The Colonel, The Extraordinary Story of Colonel Tom Parker and Elvis Presley, paints a picture of a man driven by secrets and a deep-seated fear of being exposed. His illegal status meant he could never travel outside the United States. This is a key reason Elvis never toured internationally, despite huge demand. The Colonel couldn't get a passport. Rather than admit this, he told Elvis and the world that the security risks were too great or the money wasn't right. He limited Elvis's artistic growth to protect his own secret. Did he apply the same logic to Elvis's relationships? It seems likely. A strong, independent wife might have questioned the Colonel's decisions. She might have encouraged Elvis to take more risks, to tour the world, to break out of the formulaic movie contracts. A partner like that would be a threat to the Colonel's 50% commission and his total control. And Priscilla, on the other hand, was young and isolated. She was brought into a world entirely run by the Colonel. She posed no threat to his authority. The Colonel also fostered Elvis's isolation. He kept him in a bubble, surrounded by the Memphis Mafia. These were paid employees dependent on Elvis for their livelihood. They were not in a position to question the Colonel's authority. This bubble prevented Elvis from forming relationships with people outside the Colonel's sphere of influence. It kept him dependent, emotionally and professionally. Some have argued that the Colonel actively discouraged Elvis from maturing. The cheesy movies, the safe songs, the predictable Vegas shows, they were all part of keeping Elvis in a state of arrested development. An immature Elvis was an easily managed Elvis, and an immature Elvis was less likely to form a mature, lasting partnership that could challenge the Colonel's dominance. The secret that went to the grave was the full extent of Parker's manipulation. Elvis was loyal to the Colonel. He saw him as a father figure, the man who had made it all happen. He likely never understood how Parker's own fears and secrets were shaping his destiny, including his romantic destiny. Elvis might have felt trapped, but he may never have fully realized who had built the trap. He trusted the man who called him my boy. He likely never knew that his boy was also his meal ticket, an asset to be protected at all costs, even at the cost of his happiness. The Colonel always said, "I sleep good at night." Did Elvis? What do we still not know? Did the Colonel ever explicitly tell Elvis to avoid certain women? How many potential relationships were quietly ended by Parker's behind-the-scenes maneuvering? And did Elvis, in his more lucid moments, resent the Colonel's control over his heart? Or did he see it as a necessary part of the business of being Elvis Presley? Number 16, what really happened in the final hours with Ginger Alden? Ginger Alden was the last woman in Elvis's life. She was there at the end. She was the one who found him. She was 20 years old. He was 42. He had proposed to her. She was wearing a massive 11.5 carat diamond ring. They were supposed to get married on Christmas Day 1977, but Elvis never made it. Her story is the official story in many ways. She wrote about it in her 2014 book, Elvis and Ginger. She describes their last night together. They had returned to Graceland late on the night of August 15th after a visit to the dentist. Elvis was in good spirits, she said. He was excited about the upcoming tour. They played racquetball. He sat at the piano and sang Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain. They went upstairs to his bedroom suite. He couldn't sleep. He told her he was going into his bathroom to read. He often did this. His bathroom was more like a private lounge. He kissed her goodnight and said, "I love you." Her last words to him were, "I love you too." A few hours later, in the early afternoon of August 16th, she woke up. She saw the light was still on in his bathroom. She knocked on the door, no answer. When she opened it, she found him on the floor, face down. He was gone. This is the timeline she has maintained for decades. A tragic sudden end to a man who was, in her telling, looking forward to the future. But others at Graceland that day tell a different story. The accounts are messy, contradictory. Members of the Memphis Mafia and Elvis's family have questioned Ginger's version of events. Some suggest the relationship was not as happy as she portrayed. They claim Elvis was in a deep depression. He was bloated, sick, and tired of the grind. The tour he was excited about was just another series of shows he had to drag himself through. In the book, Elvis, What Happened, written by 3 of his ex-bodyguards and published just before his death, they paint a picture of a man in a steep decline. They describe his rages, his paranoia, his out-of-control prescription drug use. This doesn't sound like a man happily planning a wedding. There are also questions about the timeline. Why did so much time pass between Elvis going into the bathroom and Ginger finding him? Some accounts suggest she didn't check on him for hours. Her mother, Jo Laverne Alden, was also in the house. The Alden family has been accused by some Elvis insiders of taking advantage of his generosity and overlooking his deteriorating health. The secret that went to the grave is the truth of Elvis's state of mind in those final hours. Was he the optimistic man Ginger describes, or was he a man who had given up? Was the proposal a genuine act of love, or a desperate, drug-fueled attempt to find an anchor in his chaotic life? Ginger Alden's account protects the image of Elvis. It gives him a dignified, peaceful exit. A man who died reading a book. The reality was likely much grimmer. He died on the floor of his bathroom, the victim of a massive heart attack brought on by a toxic cocktail of prescription drugs. Ginger was the last person to see him alive. Only she knows the exact nature of their final conversation. Only she knows the mood in that room. Her story has become a key part of the Elvis legend. But it is just that, a story. The full, unvarnished truth of that final night is known only to 2 people. And one of them is gone. What do we still not know? What was the real tone of their last conversation? Did he express any fears or regrets to her? Were there signs of a medical emergency that were missed or ignored? And why are the accounts of that final morning from different people at Graceland so wildly inconsistent? Number 15. Why didn't he marry Linda Thompson? After his divorce from Priscilla in 1973, Elvis was adrift. He was heartbroken and lonely. Then he met Linda Thompson. She was a beauty queen, Miss Tennessee. She was 22 years old. For the next 4.5 years, she was the primary woman in his life. It was one of the longest, most stable relationships he ever had. She moved into Graceland. She traveled with him on tour. She was his lover, his friend, and increasingly his nurse. Linda Thompson was different. She was smart, funny, and grounded. She genuinely loved him. She also had a strength that many of his other partners lacked. She tried, really tried, to save him from himself. In her 2016 memoir, A Little Thing Called Life, she details her time with Elvis. The picture she paints is one of incredible love and incredible dysfunction. She describes the good times, the laughter, the generosity, the private moments when he was just Elvis, not the king. But she also describes the dark side, the drug use, the mood swings, the health crises. She talks about having to call doctors in the middle of the night. She describes learning about the interactions of different prescription drugs so she could try to keep him safe. She once had to physically hold him down to stop him from choking on his own tongue during a drug-related seizure. She was a caretaker. She dedicated her life to him. So why didn't they get married? He talked about it, he gave her beautiful jewelry, he told her he loved her, but he never took that final step. The secret might lie in what Linda represented. She was a strong woman who was trying to change him. She wanted him to get healthy. She wanted him to stop taking the pills. She was trying to pull him out of the dark. And maybe a part of Elvis didn't want to be saved. A part of him was comfortable in the chaos. The drugs were his escape. The lifestyle, as destructive as it was all he knew. A marriage to Linda would have been a commitment to a different kind of life, a healthier life. It would have meant acknowledging his problems and facing them. That was something Elvis seemed incapable of doing. He was surrounded by enablers. The Memphis Mafia, the doctors who gave him the prescriptions, they all allowed him to continue his self-destructive behavior. Linda was the one voice telling him to stop. She finally left him in late 1976. She couldn't watch him die anymore. It was an act of self-preservation. She loved him, but she realized her love wasn't enough to save him. She wrote in her book that she wanted a normal life. She wanted a future. With Elvis, there was no future. There was only the endless present of tours, pills, and late nights at Graceland. The secret he took to the grave was his true reason for not marrying her. Was he afraid of a woman who was his equal? Did he know deep down that he couldn't be the man she wanted him to be, or was it simpler? Was he so broken by his divorce from Priscilla that he vowed never to marry again? He loved Linda, that seems clear, but he was married to his fame, his pain, and his addiction. There was no room for another wife. What do we still not know? Did he ever make a concrete proposal to Linda, or was it always just vague talk? How much did the influence of the Memphis Mafia, who may have felt threatened by her strength, play a role in preventing a marriage? And if she had stayed, could she have changed the outcome, or would she have just been another casualty of his tragic final years? Number 14, how much did he try to control his women? Or Elvis had a type: young, beautiful, and most importantly, malleable. He was a creator. He created his music, his image, and he tried to create his women. This wasn't just about preference. Oh, it was about control. In his relationships, Elvis was the director, and his partner was the star. I had a star who had to hit her marks and say her lines just right. The most famous example is Priscilla. When he met her in Germany, she was 14 years old. She was a blank canvas. Over the next several years, he painted his masterpiece. He oversaw a complete transformation. He insisted she dye her dark brown hair jet black to match his. He had her wear her makeup in a specific way with heavy eyeliner. He chose her clothes. He taught her how to walk, how to sit, how to carry herself. He was creating his perfect woman, his living doll. In her book, Elvis and Me, Priscilla describes this process in detail. She writes, "He wanted to mold me into his woman. At the time, she was a young girl in love. She was eager to please him. She didn't see it as control. She saw it as love. It was only later, as she grew up, that she began to feel suffocated. She realized she didn't know who she was. She only knew who Elvis wanted her to be. Her identity had been completely subsumed by his. This pattern didn't end with Priscilla. Other women in his life have described similar experiences. He had specific ideas about how a woman should look and act. He preferred women who were not in the entertainment industry. He didn't want to compete for the spotlight. He wanted a woman who would be there for him, on his terms, in his world. This need for control likely stemmed from his own chaotic life. Everything outside of Graceland was unpredictable: the fans, the press, the demands of fame. Inside Graceland, he could be king. He could create a world where everything was exactly as he wanted it. That included the people in it. By controlling his partner's appearance and behavior, he was creating a sense of order in his disordered world. It was a deeply insecure act. A truly confident man doesn't need to remake his partner. He loves her for who she is. Elvis's need to control his women suggests a deep-seated fear. A fear of being abandoned. A fear of not being enough. If he created the perfect woman, maybe she wouldn't leave him. The secret he took to the grave was the full psychological motivation behind this behavior. Was it a conscious strategy or an unconscious compulsion? Did he see it as an act of love, a way of improving his partners? Or did he know, on some level, that it was a selfish act designed to soothe his own anxieties? He presented himself as the ultimate man, confident and in charge. But his relationships reveal a man who is deeply insecure, a man who could only love someone he could completely control. What do we still not know? How many women walked away from a potential relationship with Elvis because they refused to be molded? Did any of his partners ever directly confront him about his controlling behavior? And if so, how did he react? And was this Pygmalion tendency something he developed after fame, or was it a part of his personality from the very beginning? Or number 13, was his relationship with Priscilla a lie from the start? The story is a fairy tale. The handsome American soldier, a rock and roll king, meets a beautiful, innocent young girl in a foreign land. He falls in love. He promises to send for her. He brings her to his castle, Graceland. They eventually marry and live happily ever after, except they didn't. The fairy tale was, in many ways, a carefully constructed myth. The facts are unsettling by today's standards. Elvis was 24 when he met 14-year-old Priscilla Beaulieu in Bad Nauheim, Germany in 1959. He was at the peak of his fame, serving in the U.S. Army. She was the stepdaughter of an Air Force captain. The age difference was significant. Elvis was a man of the world. Priscilla was a child. He was instantly smitten. But what was he smitten with? Her youth? Her innocence? Her potential to be shaped into his ideal. In her book, Priscilla makes it clear that their relationship in Germany was not sexual. He told her she was a child, he wanted to wait, he respected her, but the relationship itself was a form of grooming. He spent months winning her trust and the trust of her parents. He made a solemn promise to her father, Captain Beaulieu, that he would take care of her, that his intentions were honorable, and that he would one day marry her. It was this promise that convinced her parents to let their teenage daughter move to Memphis to live under Elvis's care. Think about that. A 17-year-old girl living at Graceland while finishing high school. She lived in a world of adults, a world of fame and money and excess. Elvis controlled every aspect of her life. He was her guardian, her friend, and her future husband. It was an incredible power imbalance. Was it love, or was it a project? Elvis was deeply lonely after the death of his mother. He was looking for someone to fill that void. He found a young girl who was completely devoted to him, someone he could protect and mold. It was a safe relationship. She was not a threat. She was not going to challenge him. She was going to adore him. The lie wasn't that he didn't care for her. He did. But the relationship was built on a flawed foundation. It was not a partnership of equals. It was a relationship between a powerful man and a dependent girl. He was fulfilling a fantasy, and she was living a dream that she would later realize was more of a gilded cage. The secret he took to the grave was his true motivation for choosing Priscilla. Was he genuinely in love with the person she was, or was he in love with the idea of her? Was his promise to her father a sincere commitment, or a strategic move to get what he wanted? He sold the world a fairy tale, but the reality was far more complicated. It was a relationship born out of his own deep-seated needs, fears, and desires for control. He may have loved her, but it was a love that was, from the very beginning, built on his terms and his terms alone. What do we still not know? What were the exact terms of the agreement Elvis made with Priscilla's father? Did Elvis ever have doubts about bringing a teenager into his chaotic world? And if Priscilla had been an adult woman of 24 when they met, would he have been interested in her at all? Number 12. Did a Hollywood starlet break his heart? Elvis had dozens of on-screen love interests. In the 1950s and 60s, a movie with Elvis was a ticket to fame for many young actresses. Most of these on-set romances were just that fleeting, casual affairs, a way to pass the time while filming another formulaic musical. But there were exceptions. One of the most intriguing was his brief but intense relationship with Natalie Wood. They met in 1956. Elvis was 21, the new sensation who was scaring parents across America. Natalie Wood was 18, but she was already a Hollywood veteran. She had been acting since she was a child. She was a true movie star, part of the Hollywood establishment. He was the outsider, the rebel from Memphis. Their romance was a whirlwind. He flew to Los Angeles. She introduced him to her world. They went on dates. The paparazzi followed them everywhere. It was a clash of two worlds, a Hollywood royalty and the king of rock and roll. For a moment, it seemed like a perfect celebrity pairing, but it didn't last. The relationship fizzled out after just a few weeks. The official story is that their lifestyles were too different. But there are whispers of something more. Natalie brought Elvis home to meet her parents. Her mother, Maria Zakharenko, a formidable Russian matriarch, was reportedly horrified by Elvis. She saw him as a crude, uncultured boy from the South. She didn't approve. According to some reports, she made her feelings very clear. There's also the story of Elvis meeting Natalie's friends, the sophisticated Hollywood elite. He was used to being the center of attention, the king. In that world, he was an outsider. He was reportedly quiet and uncomfortable. He didn't fit in. He was the boy from Tupelo, and they were the toast of Tinseltown. The secret here might be one of insecurity. Elvis projected an image of supreme confidence. But he was also a poor boy who had become a millionaire overnight. He was deeply sensitive about his background, and he was proud of where he came from, but he was also aware of how others saw him. Did the sophisticated, established world of Natalie Wood intimidate him? Did her mother's disapproval sting more than he let on? It's possible that Natalie Wood was one of the first women who didn't fall completely under his spell. She was her own person with her own established career and her own powerful social circle. He couldn't control her world. In fact, he was a guest in it. For a man who needed to be in control, this was an uncomfortable position. He left Hollywood and went back to Memphis, back to his own kingdom where he was in charge. He rarely spoke of Natalie Wood again, but the experience may have left a mark. It might have been his first real taste of a world where his fame and charm weren't enough. It might have been a subtle, early heartbreak. Not the kind of heartbreak from a love loss, but the kind that comes from a bruised ego and a feeling of not belonging. What do we still not know? What really happened during that meeting with Natalie Wood's parents? Did she end the relationship, or did he, and did this brief, failed romance with a true Hollywood star influence his later decision to choose women from outside the entertainment industry? Number 11. Who was the real first love before fame? Before Graceland, before the gold records, before he was the king, he was just Elvis Presley from Tupelo, Mississippi. A shy boy who loved his mother and loved music, and like any teenage boy, he had a girlfriend. Her name was Dixie Locke. She was his first serious girlfriend. They met at church in 1953. He was 18, a recent high school graduate. He was driving a truck for Crown Electric. He hadn't recorded his first song yet. He was just a kid with a dream. Dixie was his high school sweetheart. They were a normal teenage couple. They went to the movies. They went for drives. They talked about the future. Dixie Locke saw a side of Elvis that the world would never know. You know, the quiet, insecure boy who was nervous about his future. The boy who mumbled and was afraid to look people in the eye. She was there at the very beginning. She was in the car with him when he first heard his song, That's All Right, on the radio in July 1954. She was there to see the moment his life changed forever. In interviews years later, Dixie described Elvis as sweet, gentle, and very religious. He was a good boy. He loved his parents. He talked about making enough money to buy them a nice house so they wouldn't have to work anymore. But as his fame grew, their worlds began to drift apart. He was on the road constantly. He was surrounded by screaming fans. He was becoming a phenomenon. Dixie was still in Memphis trying to live a normal life. The boy she knew was disappearing, replaced by a larger-than-life public image. The relationship ended in 1955. It wasn't a dramatic breakup. They just grew apart. He was moving into a world where she couldn't follow. He was becoming Elvis Presley. The secret he took to the grave is how much that first normal love meant to him. Did he ever look back and long for the simplicity of that time? Dixie represented a life he could have had. A normal life, a wife, kids, a house in Memphis, a life without the crushing weight of fame. His relationship with Dixie Locke set a template, but in reverse, she was a peer. They were equals. They were from the same world. After her, his relationships were almost always with women who were younger, less experienced, and from outside his world. It was as if, after fame hit, he could no longer have a relationship with an equal. He needed someone who could be brought into his world, not someone who had a world of their own. Dixie was the last taste of normal he ever had. His love for her was real and uncomplicated, untainted by money or fame. It was the love of a boy for a girl. After that, his relationships would always be the king and his consort. The memory of that simple, honest love with Dixie Locke might have been a secret touchstone for him, a reminder of the man he was before the world made him a king. What do we still not know? Did Elvis ever reach out to Dixie later in life, just to talk about the old days? How did he really feel when she got married to someone else? And did the loss of that first simple love contribute to his lifelong feeling of loneliness, even when he was surrounded by adoring fans? Number 10, was he haunted by the women he couldn't have? Elvis could have almost any woman he wanted. They threw themselves at him. Actresses, dancers, fans. He had a steady stream of beautiful women coming in and out of his life, but what about the ones he couldn't have? Or More accurately, the idea of the woman he couldn't have. The woman he couldn't have was a normal woman. The girl next door. The woman who would love him for him, not for the fame. The woman who would give him a normal life. This was the great paradox of his existence. He had achieved a level of fame that made a normal life impossible, and yet a normal life was what he sometimes seemed to crave the most. Think about the women he chose. He often picked women from small towns, women who were not part of the Hollywood machine. Priscilla, Linda Thompson, Ginger Alden, they were all in their own way normal girls. He brought them into his extraordinary world. It was as if he was trying to import a piece of normalcy into his life, but it never worked. His world was so powerful, it changed them. It turned them into Elvis's woman. They could never remain normal. This haunting was not about a specific person, like a lost love. It was about a lost possibility, the possibility of an anonymous life, a life where he could go to the movies without renting out the entire theater. A life where he could have a real conversation with a stranger, a life where a woman's affection wasn't automatically suspect. Did she love him or the idea of him? He could never be sure. This fantasy of a normal life is a recurring theme in stories about Elvis. The Memphis Mafia talked about how he would sometimes just drive around Memphis late at night, looking at the quiet houses, wondering what it was like to live in them. He was the king, but he was also a prisoner in his own castle. The secret he took to the grave was the depth of this longing. Was it just a fleeting sentimental thought, or was it a constant gnawing pain? Did he feel like he had made a devil's bargain? He had traded a normal life for a legendary one? And in that trade, he might have lost the chance for the one thing he really wanted, a true, simple, uncomplicated love. The women he couldn't have were the millions of women who would never know the man, only the myth. And he was trapped inside that myth, looking out, perhaps haunted by the ghost of a life he could never lead and a woman he could never meet. What do we still not know? Did he ever seriously consider walking away from his career to pursue a normal life? Were there women he was interested in, but never approached because he knew his fame would destroy any chance of a real relationship? And how much of his drug use was an attempt to numb the pain of this profound and inescapable loneliness? Or number 9, did his spirituality make him a difficult partner? Towards the end of the 1960s, Elvis became obsessed with a new kind of seeking. It wasn't for fame or money, it was for spiritual enlightenment. This was a side of Elvis the public rarely saw. He was not just a rock and roller, he was a deep thinker, a voracious reader, and a spiritual seeker. His guide on this journey was his hairdresser, Larry Geller. Geller introduced Elvis to a world of esoteric books and ideas. In books like The Impersonal Life, Autobiography of a Yogi, and The Prophet, Elvis devoured them. He underlined passages, he filled the margins with notes, he was searching for answers to the big questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose? This spiritual quest became a central part of his life. He would stay up all night talking about philosophy and religion with Geller and the few members of the Memphis Mafia who were interested. He talked about numerology, past lives, and astral projection. He saw his talent as a gift from God. He believed he had a purpose beyond just singing songs. But how did this intense spiritual life affect his relationships? It likely made him a very difficult partner. His partners, like Priscilla, were often much younger and not on the same intellectual or spiritual wavelength. While he was wrestling with the mysteries of the universe, they were living in the material world of Graceland. Priscilla wrote about this in her book. She described how he would try to share his new beliefs with her. He would read to her for hours from his spiritual books. He wanted her to understand. He wanted her to join him on his quest, but she was a young woman. She was more interested in going out in living life. She found the long late-night spiritual discussions boring. She couldn't connect with him on that level. This created a huge gulf between them. He was on a spiritual journey, and she was not. He likely saw this as a major failing in their relationship. This disconnect was a recurring theme. His partners were chosen for their beauty and their ability to fit into his world. They were not chosen for their intellectual or spiritual companionship. He was looking for one thing in a woman, a beautiful, devoted companion, while needing something else entirely, a spiritual partner who could understand his deepest thoughts. The secret he took to the grave was how this spiritual loneliness fueled his unhappiness. He was surrounded by people, but he felt intellectually and spiritually isolated. He had a deep inner world that he couldn't share with the people closest to him. His wife, his girlfriend, his friends, Most of them didn't understand what he was searching for. This spiritual quest was also at odds with his lifestyle. He was reading about asceticism and purity while living a life of incredible excess. He was talking about God while abusing prescription drugs. This hypocrisy must have created a tremendous internal conflict. He was a man torn between the sacred and the profane, and that conflict likely played out in his relationships, making him a moody, unpredictable, and ultimately very lonely partner. What do we still not know? How deeply did he believe in the spiritual texts he was reading? Was it a genuine quest for truth, or was it just another distraction from his real problems? And did he ever find a woman who could meet him on that spiritual level, even for a brief time? Number 8 were the Memphis Mafia, friends or enablers. Elvis never went anywhere alone. He was always surrounded by a group of men, his inner circle. The press called them the Memphis Mafia. They were his friends, his bodyguards, his employees, and his family. They lived with him, traveled with him, and worked for him. They were the buffer between Elvis and the world. Their loyalty to him was absolute, but was their friendship healthy? The Memphis Mafia served many roles. They protected him from overzealous fans. They took care of his daily needs. They were his companions in the lonely bubble of fame. Guys like Joe Esposito, Sonny West, Red West, and Lamar Fike were with him for years. They shared the good times and the bad. But their role in his relationships was complex and often troubling. They were the gatekeepers. If a woman wanted to get to Elvis, she often had to go through them. They facilitated his affairs, they arranged dates, they helped him keep his various relationships secret from each other. They were accomplices in his infidelity. More than that, they were enablers. They were on his payroll, their livelihood depended on keeping him happy, and if keeping him happy meant looking the other way at his drug use, they looked the other way. If it meant supplying him with women, they supplied them. They were not in a position to say no to the king. To question Elvis was to risk being kicked out of the circle, to be exiled. In the 1977 tell-all book, Elvis, What Happened? Red West, Sonny West, and Dave Hebler, all fired by Elvis's father, Vernon laid bare the dark side of life with the king. They described his drug abuse, his violent temper, and his destructive behavior. They claimed they wrote the book as a desperate wake-up call, an attempt to shock Elvis into getting help. Elvis saw it as the ultimate betrayal. He died before he could fully process it. The book revealed the central conflict of the Memphis Mafia. Were they his friends, or were they his employees? A true friend tells you the hard truth. A true friend stops you from destroying yourself. An employee tells you what you want to hear. An employee keeps the boss happy. For most of their time with Elvis, the Memphis Mafia acted like employees. Their presence also created an unnatural environment for any relationship. A woman wasn't just dating Elvis, she was dating Elvis and his entourage. There was no privacy. The guys were always there. This made true intimacy almost impossible. The secret that went to the grave was how Elvis really felt about these men. Did he see them as true friends, or did he know, on some level, that their loyalty was bought and paid for? Did he resent his dependence on them, or was he so terrified of being alone that he was willing to trade real friendship for constant companionship? They were the architects of his bubble. They protected him, but they also imprisoned him. And they stood by and watched as the man they loved slowly destroyed himself. What do we still not know? How many times did members of the Memphis Mafia try to intervene in his self-destruction, only to be shut down by Elvis? Did their presence actively sabotage his chances at a successful long-term relationship? And if Elvis had been surrounded by independent advisors instead of paid friends, could his life have had a different ending? Number 7, how deep did his fear of being alone go? Elvis Presley was one of the most famous people on the planet. He could fill stadiums with a single announcement. He was loved by millions, and yet he was terrified of being alone. This fear was the driving force behind so much of his behavior. It shaped his lifestyle, his friendships, and his romantic relationships. He never slept in a house by himself, ever. From the time he became famous until the day he died, there was always someone else at Graceland. The Memphis Mafia lived on the property. His father Vernon and his grandmother lived there. There were always people around. The house was never empty. The silence was never allowed to creep in. His fear extended to his bedroom. According to many accounts, including from Linda Thompson, he hated sleeping alone. He always needed someone in the bed with him. If he and his girlfriend had a fight, He would often have one of the Memphis Mafia guys or their wives sleep in the same room, just so he wouldn't be by himself. This was not just a preference. It was a deep pathological fear. Where did it come from? It likely had roots in his childhood. He was born in a tiny two-room house in Tupelo. His family was extremely poor. They were a tight-knit unit, bound together by poverty and love. He was especially close to his mother, Gladys. Then there was the ghost of his twin brother, Jesse, who was stillborn. He grew up with the sense of a missing other half. Being alone might have felt like a profound and unnatural state for him. Fame amplified this fear. Fame is incredibly isolating. It separates you from normal people. Everyone wants something from you. It's hard to trust anyone. The fear of being alone became entangled with the fear of being used, of being misunderstood. So he built a fortress around himself, Graceland, and he filled it with people he trusted, people who depended on him. This terror of solitude had a huge impact on his relationships. It meant he was never truly single. He moved from one relationship to the next, with almost no time in between. The end of his marriage to Priscilla was immediately followed by his relationship with Linda Thompson. When Linda left, Ginger Alden soon appeared. He needed a woman in his life, in his house, in his bed. The alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. This meant that his relationships were often born out of need, not just love. He needed a companion, he needed a warm body next to him in the dark. This desperation likely led him to make poor choices. It made him vulnerable, and it put incredible pressure on the women in his life. You know, they weren't just his lovers, they were his security blankets against the terror of loneliness. What do we still not know? What was the specific source of this deep-seated fear? Was it a traumatic event in his childhood? Was it connected to the loss of his twin? And did he ever talk about this fear with any of his partners? Or was it a silent terror that dictated his every move without ever being spoken aloud? Number 6, did he hide a secret sexuality? This is the most controversial and speculative of all the secrets. Elvis Presley was the ultimate symbol of heterosexual masculinity. His appeal was raw, sexual, and directed at women. He was the king, and he had his pick of queens. But for decades, rumors have persisted about a hidden side to his sexuality. These rumors are complex. They are not simple claims that he was secretly gay. Instead, they point to a more fluid or repressed sexuality, one that was completely at odds with his public image and the conservative era he lived in. Some of these rumors stem from his intense homosocial world. He lived surrounded by men. The Memphis Mafia was an all-male club. They lived in close quarters. Their devotion to him was total. While there's no credible evidence of sexual relationships in the group, the environment was one of intense male bonding that excluded women from the inner sanctum. There are also stories about his early years, his flamboyant style, the pink suits, the eye makeup. In the 1950s, this was radical. It blurred gender lines. It was part of what made him seem so dangerous to conservative America. He was beautiful in a way that few male stars had been before. Then there are the specific rumors of relationships with men. The most persistent one involves the actor Nick Adams. Adams was a contemporary of James Dean and was part of the young Hollywood scene in the 50s. He and Elvis became friends. Some biographers and Hollywood historians have alleged that their friendship was more than platonic. There is no definitive proof. Both men are gone. The truth, whatever it was, died with them. It's also important to consider the context of his life. He was born in Mississippi in 1935. He grew up in the Pentecostal church. The world he came from was rigid in its views on sexuality and masculinity. If he had any feelings that were outside the norm, he would have had to repress them. His fame then locked him into the role of the ultimate ladies' man. He had an image to uphold. Any deviation would have been career suicide. The secret that went to the grave is the truth of his own sexual identity. Was he a straightforward heterosexual man, as his public life suggested, or was he a man with complex, perhaps bisexual, feelings that he had to suppress his entire life? Or was his true sexuality simply a deep, unfulfilled connection to his stillborn twin, a love for a male counterpart that could never be realized in the physical world? We'll never know, but the persistence of these rumors points to a man who was far more complex than his simple hyper-masculine image suggested. What do we still not know? What was the true nature of his friendship with Nick Adams? Did he have other secret relationships with men that have never come to light? And how much of his internal turmoil and self-destructive behavior was fueled by a lifelong conflict over his own sexuality? Number 5, what was the true nature of his bond with his father? Vernon Presley was a quiet background figure for most of Elvis's life. The spotlight was always on Elvis and his beloved mother Gladys. Vernon was the man who managed the money, the man who took care of the practical things. He was a steady, if distant, presence, but their relationship was far more complicated than it appeared, especially after Gladys died. Vernon and Elvis were bound by a shared devastating loss. The death of Gladys in 1958 broke them both. For a time, it brought them closer. Elvis was in the army in Germany. Vernon and his mother-in-law, Minnie May, moved there to be with him. They were a broken family, clinging to each other. But as the years went on, a distance grew. Vernon was a simple countryman. He was thrust into a world of incredible wealth and fame. He was put in charge of Elvis's finances, a job he was not equipped for. He was famously frugal, a trait that came from his years of extreme poverty. This sometimes put him at odds with his son's incredible generosity. The real rift, however, came when Vernon remarried. In 1960, he married a divorced woman named Dee Stanley. Elvis was polite to his new stepmother, but he never truly accepted her. In his heart, no one could replace his mother. He felt it was a betrayal of Gladys's memory. He famously never visited the home Vernon and Dee shared, which was right on the edge of the Graceland property. This created a quiet tension between father and son. Vernon had moved on, Elvis had not. Elvis continued to idealize his dead mother, while his father had built a new life with a new woman. And Vernon was also a passive figure when it came to Elvis's health. He saw his son's decline. He saw the drugs, but he seemed powerless to stop it. Like the Memphis Mafia, he was dependent on Elvis. He was the father, but Elvis was the boss. This reversal of roles made it impossible for Vernon to exert any real parental authority. He could only watch, worry, and manage the money. The secret that went to the grave was the depth of their unspoken resentments. Did Elvis resent his father for remarrying? Did he see it as a lack of loyalty? Did Vernon resent his son's fame? The fame that had turned him into little more than a glorified bookkeeper. Did he feel emasculated by his son's power and wealth? They loved each other. That is not in doubt. But their relationship was strained by grief, money, and a fundamental inability to communicate their true feelings. They were two lonely men, living side by side, bound by blood, but separated by a chasm of unspoken pain. What do we still not know? How deep was Elvis's anger over his father's remarriage? Did Vernon ever try to confront Elvis about his drug use in a serious way? And how did their complicated relationship shape Elvis's own views on what it meant to be a husband and a father to his own daughter, Lisa Marie? Number 4 was his ideal woman just a fantasy. Elvis had a pattern. Look at the most significant women in his life: Priscilla Beaulieu, Linda Thompson, Ginger Alden. They were all significantly younger than him. They were all beautiful brunettes or were encouraged to become brunettes. They were all from relatively simple small-town backgrounds, and they were all introduced to his world, not the other way around. This was not a coincidence. It was a template. Elvis was searching for something, but was he searching for a real person, or was he trying to fill a role in the movie of his own life? His ideal woman was not a partner, but a creation. He wanted innocence. He wanted purity. He wanted a woman he could teach, mold, and protect. This fantasy likely had its roots in his relationship with his mother Gladys. She was the first woman in his life, and their bond was incredibly intense. She was his protector, his confidante, his biggest fan. When she died, he was shattered. Many have argued that he spent the rest of his life trying to find her again. But he wasn't looking for a mother figure. He was looking for the opposite. He was looking for someone he could be the protector of, a reversal of his relationship with his mother. He was also looking for someone who was untainted by the world he lived in. The world of Hollywood was, in his eyes, phony and corrupt. He wanted someone real. But by bringing these real women into his unreal world, he inevitably changed them. He was chasing a fantasy that his own life made impossible. The problem with a fantasy is that real people can't live up to it. Priscilla grew up, she developed her own thoughts, her own desires. She stopped being the living doll he had created. And when she asserted her own identity, the marriage fell apart. He couldn't handle a partner who was his equal. He needed to be the one in charge. The secret he took to the grave was whether he ever realized this pattern in himself. Did he understand that he was chasing an impossible ideal? Or did he just think he was unlucky in love, always picking the wrong woman? He seemed to believe that the problem was with them, not with his own unrealistic expectations. He was in love with an idea, the idea of a pure, devoted woman who would complete him. But this idea left no room for a real flawed, independent human being. He was forever casting a role that no living woman could ever truly fill. His search for the ideal woman was destined to fail, because the woman he was looking for didn't exist outside of his own imagination. What do we still not know? Was there a specific woman in his youth who became the template for this ideal? Did any of his partners ever call him out on his fantasy, telling him they couldn't live up to his impossible standards? And if he had lived longer, would he have ever broken this pattern and found a relationship with a true equal? Number 3, did the divorce from Priscilla truly break him? The official story of their divorce is simple. Priscilla had an affair with her karate instructor, Mike Stone. Elvis was devastated by her infidelity. Their marriage ended, but the truth is much more complicated. The divorce was not the end of their love story. In some ways, it was a new and more painful beginning. Their marriage had been in trouble for years. Elvis was a serial cheater. He had affairs with his co-stars throughout their relationship. He was an absentee husband and father. He was living in a bubble of drugs and sycophants. Priscilla was desperately lonely. She was a young woman living in a gilded cage, married to a man who was more of an institution than a husband. Her affair was a symptom of a broken marriage, not the cause. She left him in 1972. The divorce was finalized in 1973. They walked out of the courthouse holding hands. It was an amicable split, but for Elvis, the emotional fallout was catastrophic. He might have been a bad husband, but he could not handle being the one who was left. His ego was shattered. The period after his divorce was one of his most artistically fertile and personally destructive. He recorded some of his most emotional songs, like Always on My Mind and My Boy. These were raw, heartbreaking performances. He was channeling his pain into his music. It was a cry from the heart of a man who had lost his family, but he was also spiraling. His drug use escalated dramatically. His behavior became more erratic. He was hospitalized several times. He was heartbroken. The loss of Priscilla, and more importantly, the loss of having his daughter Lisa Marie under his roof, sent him into a deep depression from which he never fully recovered. The secret that went to the grave was the full extent of his post-divorce despair. Though he put on a brave face for the public, he was still Elvis Presley the King. But in private, he was a broken man. He had lost the family unit he had always craved. He had lost the woman he had spent a decade molding into his perfect wife. He had failed. He and Priscilla remained close. They talked on the phone all the time. He still loved her. And she still loved him. Their relationship had transformed from a marriage into a deep, complicated friendship. But he could never get over the fact that she had chosen to leave him. It was a wound that never healed. The divorce didn't just end his marriage. For many people close to him, it was the beginning of his slow, 5-year decline towards death. What do we still not know? Did Elvis ever take responsibility for his role in the failure of their marriage? How much of his subsequent relationships were just attempts to, fill the void left by Priscilla? And if she had never left him, would he still be alive today, or would she have simply been dragged down with him? Number 2, how did the death of his mother define all his future relationships? To understand Elvis, you have to understand Gladys. Gladys Love Presley was the center of his universe. Their bond was preternaturally close. He was her only surviving child. She doted on him. They had their own private language. They were two hearts that beat as one. She was his rock. Through the poverty of his childhood, through the struggles of his early career, she was his constant supporter. When he became a star, his first priority was to take care of her. He bought her Graceland. He bought her a pink Cadillac. Everything he did for her. In 1958, while Elvis was in the army, Gladys got sick. She was diagnosed with acute hepatitis. Her health declined rapidly. Elvis was granted emergency leave to fly home to Memphis. He arrived just in time to say goodbye. She died on August 14th, 1958. She was 46 years old. Elvis was 23. He was inconsolable. At her funeral, he threw himself over her casket, crying, "Oh God, everything I have is gone." He was never the same again. The death of his mother was the single most traumatic event of his life. It left a wound that never healed, and it cast a long shadow over all of his future relationships with women. Some have argued that Elvis spent the rest of his life searching for Gladys. Not in a romantic sense, but in the sense of looking for that unconditional love, that complete devotion, that feeling of being the absolute center of someone's world. He was looking for a replacement for the one person who he knew would never leave him, who would never betray him. This impossible search shaped his choice of partners. He chose women he could protect and control, just as Gladys had protected him. He chose women who were young and innocent, women who could offer the kind of pure, uncomplicated adoration he had lost. But no one could ever live up to the memory of his mother. Gladys was a saint in his mind. Any real living woman would be flawed by comparison. This put an incredible strain on his relationships. His partners were not just competing with other women, they were competing with the ghost of a perfect mother. The secret that went to the grave was the full depth of this psychological scar. Was he even capable of having a healthy, mature relationship with a woman after his mother died? Or was he doomed to forever search for a love that he had already found and lost? The death of Gladys didn't just break his heart. It may have permanently broken his ability to truly connect with another woman. He was a boy who had lost his mother, and in some ways he remained that lost boy for the rest of his life. What do we still not know? How much did Elvis blame himself and his fame for his mother's death, believing the stress of his new life contributed to her illness? Did he consciously see parallels between his mother and the women he chose? And was his inability to control his own self-destructive impulses a slow, unconscious form of suicide, a way to be reunited with the mother he could not live without? Number 1, was he always in a relationship with his stillborn twin? This is the deepest secret, the one that explains all the others. It's the ghost story at the heart of Elvis Presley's life. On January 8th, 1935, in Tupelo, Mississippi, Gladys Presley gave birth to twin boys. The first, Jesse Garon Presley, was stillborn. 35 minutes later, Elvis Aaron Presley was born. He survived, his brother did not. Elvis grew up as an only child, but he never felt like one. He grew up in the shadow of the brother he never knew. His parents often spoke of Jesse. They told Elvis that when one twin dies, the surviving one gets the strength of both. From a very young age, Elvis felt a profound connection to his lost twin. He believed Jesse was always with him, a guardian angel, a spiritual companion. This was not just a childhood fantasy. It was a core part of his identity. Throughout his life, he would talk to Jesse. He would visit his unmarked grave. He felt his presence, especially in times of loneliness or crisis. In his book, Elvis and Me, his longtime friend Sonny West recalls Elvis saying, "There's two of us. I'm not alone." This lifelong relationship with an unseen other had a massive and largely hidden impact on his relationships with living people. You know, if your primary soulmate is a spirit, a perfect, idealized version of yourself, how can any real, flawed human being ever compete? His search for love might not have been a search for a wife or a girlfriend. It might have been a search for a physical manifestation of Jesse. He was looking for his other half. This could explain his obsession with a certain type of woman. He wasn't just trying to create a living doll, he was trying to create a partner who could somehow complete the empty space beside him. It could also explain his deep, abiding loneliness. He could be in a room full of people, in bed with a beautiful woman, and still feel completely alone, because the one person he truly wanted to connect with was not there. His twin was a constant presence and a constant absence. A ghost in the room. This is the ultimate secret that went to the grave. The true nature of his bond with Jesse Garon. This wasn't just a sad family story. It was the central defining relationship of his life. A relationship with a ghost. It shaped his personality, his spirituality, his art, and his tragic inability to find lasting peace with another living soul. He was born a twin, and he died a twin. The world saw a man who had everything. But he may have spent his entire life feeling like only half a person, forever searching for his missing part. What do we still not know? How often did Elvis talk about Jesse to his partners? Did they understand the depth of this spiritual connection, or did they dismiss it as a strange quirk? And ultimately, was Elvis Presley's life a desperate 42-year-long search for a connection that he had lost in the first 35 minutes? The secret of Jesse Garon may be the key that unlocks the mystery of Elvis's lonely heart.